Welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. Today, before we get started, we'll do a little bit of music as I normally do. And then we will get to the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about. But spoiler alert, the title is self-explanatory. Let's get it started. Welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. I am your host, Willie Bragg, and I hope that this day finds you well. Well, what I want to do is to talk about our former president of the United States, who shared a few words about his thoughts on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and when doing so, And when doing so, he kind of let something out that he probably rather not bring up. A sore subject. I believe this was at the George W. Bush Institute. So just recently, I'm going to let you hear what he had to say. And I have a few words. Believe me, I have a few words right afterwards. So hold tight. This is George W. Bush with his slip up gaff, sticking his foot up his mouth as we always remembered him doing so. So here we go.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway, 75.
I'll let you hear that again. It's very short, but you heard it. I'm going to let you hear that one more time. 43 seconds. I'm going to let you hear that one more time.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway, 75.
Just to think about it, this man's been rehabilitated. I mean, he was a pariah. He was very unpopular when he left the office in 2009. Totally disgraced. Not only by his normal liberal opposition, progressive opposition, whatever you want to call it, the Democrats, but even many of his fellow Republicans were basically ashamed of this man when he left office. Many still are to this day. And he's been rehabilitated, not by necessarily his fellow Republicans, but kind of obviously by a lot of the kind of liberals that I've always despised, corporate Democrats, but even a few nominal progressives look at him, be like, oh, gee, he's not so bad. He's not so bad. Orange Man really brought out the worst in a lot of people. Orange Man was kind of bad in a lot of ways. I'm not underestimating how bad he was. But he wasn't worse than George W. Bush. I can't think of a president in modern history that was worse than George W. Bush. And there were very few people there were very few people that seriously tried to bring him to justice. Oh, there was some talk maybe on the, it was what some people call the far left back then. Really, the only person that was actually trying to get him arrested that was an elected person was a Congressman, Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. But really, you didn't hear much else, Even Keith Olbermann of MSNBC apologized to former President George W. Bush, which makes me look at Keith Olbermann with contempt today, and to think that I just thought he was a great guy 15 years ago. So I want to go and speak my piece right now and get this shit out of my chest. So let's get started. And because I remember January 2001 to January 2009, and what a horrible time period it was. This is my message for former President George Walker Bush, better known as George W. Bush, the 43rd President of the United States. A man that was illegitimate. People said that Donald Trump was illegitimate because supposedly Vladimir Putin put him in there, and people claim, and that's a lot of diehard Democrats. A lot of diehard Republicans felt like that there were fraudulent maneuvers in the 2020 election, and many of them saying, well, they don't recognize Joe Biden as their president, and therefore, he's a fraud. Well, no. George W. Bush was the most fraudulent president from the get-go. In 2000, with the Chads and the down in Florida, in southern Florida, some of the counties down there, you had Secretary of State Kathleen Harris, who was a Republican, very close to the Bush family, and Governor Jeb Bush, conflict of interest, worked to basically make sure that George W. Bush was to be elected president. It was carried to the Supreme Court. Reagan, Bush appointees over the years, Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush, his worthless dad, stacked the courts and basically appointed or selected George W. Bush as president. So he was never legitimate as far as I was concerned. To me, he was an illegitimate president. I hated Al Gore, but George W. Bush was the most illegitimate president this country has ever had. So this is my message to former President George W. Bush. You are under arrest. The summons of your arrest is based on the following crimes of your time as president of the United States. With your confessions to your invasion of Iraq this past week, you need to be reminded why you must not walk around as a free man, but serve in prison for crimes against humanity. You're to be placed under arrest for launching 2 wars which were not justified. The first nation you invaded was Afghanistan, and the U.S. remained there for 20 years with nothing to show for it other than the loss of 241,000 innocent Afghans. The people that were killed under your watch and your 3 successors' watch were done so by a combination of lust for dollars to appease defense contractors and also to distract from your very incompetence you express every day through the 8 insufferable years of your presidency, which will place you justifiably as the worst U.S. president in modern times. 241,000 people died because of you. In addition, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which was based on a lie. The lie that caused the death of over 500,000 innocent Iraqis due to blaming this nation for an attack that at the U.S. that they themselves were in no way responsible for. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And Saddam Hussein, who was a secular dictator and not a very nice man, had ironically Western inclinations compared to the other bad actors in the Middle East at that time. And he was needlessly scapegoated to settle a score that you wanted to because your father's feelings were hurt over the Iraq-Kuwait skirmish in 1990. Keeping in mind that Saddam Hussein was on the payroll at one time of the CIA. Because your dad's worthless feelings were harmed. And keep in mind, George Herbert Walker Bush, the former vice president under Ronald Reagan, the former head of the CIA, and the father of George W. Bush, was also a worthless president too. Not only did these invasions impose harms on innocents abroad, it placed great harm on our U.S. military, especially those who had to fight because of your bloodlust. Tens of thousands of American soldiers needlessly either died or were physically or psychologically or financially devastated because of your actions. The family of these soldiers were also just as harmed on an emotional level too. Let's not forget that those military veterans of Afghanistan, Iraq, and all other past wars were subjected to means testing to find ways to deny VA benefits after the times that they served in the military forces, fighting for our rights and for our freedoms, performing at great risk, and even for love for their country. They were to be denied health benefits. There are also environmental effects of war, the damage that was done to our ecology due to our special interests in the oil industries, along with defense industries, to keep conflicts going, to financially prosper at all our expenses. The world was at the cusp of World War III then, as we are today, because of your actions. I would insist that your actions led to the situation we're in today. Our nation remains stuck with the Washington consensus of the post 9/11 world that you created, which amounts to the saying that insanity is repeating the same mistake over and over, expecting a different result. This is why you and Dick Cheney brought us 2 wars, with Obama expanding it to 7 wars, with Trump increasing drone strikes, as well as murdering an Iranian general who was an opponent of ISIS and other jihadi forces as much as the U.S., plus the current situation of the White House with a neoconified Democratic Party and the same usual neocon suspects of the Republican Party calling for more perpetual war. Look at Russia and Ukraine today. All of this impose harm onto our domestic economy. We are $30 trillion in debt today. It's not the stimulus checks. It's not food stamps that supposedly got all this spending out of control. The tens of trillions of dollars in the last 2 decades wasted on these neocon wars to once again appease defense contractors, to also appease the culture war, basically consisting of evangelical Christians, by waging these wars to basically usher in World War III, or try to do so. I'm not partisan. Democrats do it too with the 2016 election. This is why we're in the cusp of World War III with Russia. Republicans use evangelical Christians to try to start World War III in the Middle East. Democrats try to start World War III with Russia because they're mad that they think that Vladimir Putin put Donald Trump in the White House in 2016. This is why both parties are horrible. We're supposed to be a free society. We're supposed to live in a free society. Some of us call it a representative democracy. Some of us call it a constitutional republic. We're supposed to be a free country. It was during your presidency that America really saw the real destruction, the corrosion of the U.S. Constitution. It was through measures like the Patriot Act, the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security under the Bush presidency, that took place and was solidified with the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 under Obama and the various anti-BDS laws around the country that existed under Trump with his blessing, and with the recent creation of the Disinformation Governance Board under Joe Biden, which was thankfully discarded. Your authoritarian actions led by also your successors doing the same thing, for which they're just as accountable. The U.S. Constitution basically turned into toilet paper because of your presidency. The U.S. Patriot Act undermined the freedom of speech, due process protections, and the right to privacy. Torture was also imposed at those who were political prisoners, especially at Guantanamo Bay. It isn't that I'm some sort of good person. For far too long, justice is nowhere to be seen. Justice can arrive once you're in custody. Hatred is wrong, and it's something that I wish that I didn't have within me. Mr. Bush, your crimes against humanity earn my utter and contempt hatred toward you. I oppose capital punishment, and I oppose torture, even for those who've done wrong. What I desire is swift justice. Even as you remain a free man, I hope that you do not rest in peace for the rest of your life. Every waking moment for the rest of your life, you have to live with the pain, suffering, and the death you cause, and let it burn in your conscience. This is what I have to say to George W. Bush, who so nonchalantly chuckled with his gaffe. I do not support Vladimir Putin's invasion of the Ukraine. But Vladimir Putin have killed less people than George W. Bush. Why do we allow a man like George W. Bush to walk around a free man when he needs to be behind bars? He's not the only one. He's not the only one. Dick Cheney walks around as a free man. John Bolton walks around as a free man. We have people in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate that voted for this war in Iraq. Some of them are in the present presidential administration. Some of them were past presidential candidates in 2016. One of them was an actual first lady. I'm not being partisan, people. I just don't like what's going on. Even as a socialist, I'm not partisan. Because across the pond, somebody who butchered the ideology of the Labor Party by the name of Tony Blair went along with the crimes of George W. Bush. He was his partner in crime. And where were they getting their advice from? They got their advice from the worst prime minister Israel has ever gotten when he was the foreign minister under Ariel Sharon. I'm talking about Benjamin Netanyahu. He was really urging George W. Bush and Tony Blair to go into Iraq. And if Benjamin Netanyahu is asking to do something, I would tell people do just the opposite. That's another war criminal walking around as a free man. Henry Kissinger is still walking around as a free man. We have a lot of war criminals walking around as free. Well, we have journalists. Thankfully, the British government is not allowing the U.S. government to get their hands to bring them across the ocean, because they know what the American government will do to such an individual. I'm referring to Julian Assange. Julian Assange is his life is in danger by the U.S. government, but George W. Bush walks around as a free man. What kind of a fucking world do we live in? Okay. Right now, Kevin Tui's back on the chat line. Miscarriages of justice, if only you rest at George W. Bush and not William Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and the rest, including Obama, Biden, and all war criminals, the same as Bush. I just stated that, and I'm not partisan. They're all war criminals, every last one of them. But it was the most wrongful response you can imagine in the 9/11 aftermath that I saw. And it led to a lot of problems that we have today. Dude, you're completely biased against the Democrats, and they are literally the same as the Republicans. I mentioned the Democrats. It's all a show, and they support the oligarchy, neither more or less. I criticize the Democrats too. We have a present administration. That some people in this present administration, what one person was a U.S. senator from a small little state called Delaware. He defeated Donald Trump in 2020. He voted for this war. He did the right thing getting the U.S. troops out of Afghanistan, but what the fuck? We're sending troops to Somalia and rattle sabling just to please Hillary Clinton. No, I call it like I see it. I do. No, I'm not partisan at all. I was pleased with Senator Rand Paul last week when he blocked the $40 billion in aid to the Ukraine. No, that was fucking base what Rand Paul did. Problem with the Republican Party is that they don't listen to Rand Paul when he makes good sense. They only listen to the bad things he advocates. But they don't listen to the good things he advocates. And when he makes sense, he really makes sense. And I got issues with Rand Paul, but his voting to block the $40 billion was sure as hell not one of them. But then again, I've always had respect for libertarians, even if I disagree with them on economics. His father is even a better man, Ron Paul. And again, economics, he sucks, but he's even better on policies than Rand Paul. But it's not about partisanship, because with the weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, we saw a good chunk of people from across the spectrum in the House and the Senate working together to block arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And that was a good thing. It's a beautiful thing when you see things like that. When you have people like Mike Lee and Bernie Sanders working together. I mean, when you have people like, Ro Khanna and somebody I don't even care about, Matt Gaetz. I don't like Matt Gaetz. He's not wrong to work with Ro Khanna to go and block arms sales to Saudi Arabia. I'm not going to give Marjorie Taylor Greene credit for voting correctly on the $40 billion in the U.S. House, because while she was voting $40 billion in the U.S. House last week, in the guise of being concerned about baby formula, she was voting against baby formula being available to young babies for free or as a service. So, so much for her being pro-life. But anyway, if you all like what you heard, press like and comment. If you disagree with what I have to say, comment anyway. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we're the muckrakers of our time. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and remember, like I always said, we have class struggle to wage, always. We have war to always oppose, because there's no war like a class war. And that warfare, when it comes to people killing each other, only thing it serves is the defense contractors, military industrial complex, all that shit that Dwight Eisenhower warned us about. We have a First Amendment to say our speech needs to be protected, even speech that we don't like. Because when we defend speech that we don't like, we're also going to be defending our speech that we want to have protected. And that means we need to also protect freedom of the press, which is under attack too. And that's why we need to say to ourselves, we're all Julian Assange. And this is where I conclude and say, music. Until next time, I repeat, we're all Julian Assange.